today in our boasted modern civilization, we are facing just exactly the same problems, just exactly the same conflicts between two schools of philosophy that they faced in the earliest days of America.
On January 6th, the world witnessed the worst modern homegrown attack on the Constitution, as well as the populace it was drafted to protect. Just before noon, Donald Trump prepared to step out onto a stage where he and his closest allies riled up an extremely sizable crowd and directed them towards not only the Capitol building, but the representatives within as well. By the end of the night, not only had the coup failed to overturn democracy and uproot the citadel of our institutions, the joint session of Congress confirmed Joe Biden's victory, obtaining the margin to win at 3:31 a.m. and ending the count at 3:40 a.m., finalizing his presidential run.
Amy Klobuchar, tellers on the part of the Senate, Zoe Lofgren and Rodney Davis, tellers on the part of the House of Representatives, report the following as a result of the ascertainment and counting of the electoral vote for President and Vice President of the United States for the term beginning on the 20th day of January, 2021. The report we make is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the president and the vice president according to the ballots that have been given to us.
This literal confirmation of the strength of our democracy was a welcome sight for all freedom-loving people across the globe. However, while many are not disregarding President Trump as a figure meant to leave in the past, as well as just a sore loser, history does advise us to worry not on the immediate effects, but on any latency that could potentially compile over the next decade. But to say that history advises us, we must compare these events in order to grasp the situation and the reality of what we are facing today. The story we'll lay out here is as familiar to us as our own reflection now, as Americans and just humans inhabiting the current earth, and will maybe provide some context on how Trump and his most fervent following may not yet quite be out for the count. Disclaimer: everything discussed today is for the absolute and only purpose of education. I in no way endorse any actions that will be discussed today or any actions by any white supremacist, and certainly not Adolf Hitler. As well, it is not meant to provide steps to recreate this. This is simply an exercise showing how we can learn from our past to educate our future. On a freezing Bavarian winter day, November 8th, 1923, the Nazi Party leaders begin to realize their early political success has grown far, far more fragile than ever thought, with communism beginning to convince fascist followers of its sustainability and suitability. And after Bavarian Prime Minister Eugene von Milling declared a state of emergency on the 26th of September 1923, a dictatorial ruling triumvirate formed, including the newly appointed State Commissioner Ritter von Kahr, Police Chief Colonel Hans Ritter von Sesser, and Army General Otto von Lossow. These three men effectively now ruled Germany, and technically, for them at least, unchallenged. Even with the power shift, it would still be relatively fair to say that this was a continuation of the German status quo, even if a heavily militarized one. This led to a relatively new leader in politics to proceed with a plan previously thought far too dangerous. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's March on Rome, Adolf Hitler, alongside 603 of his most loyal supporters, known as the SA or the Storm Detachment, or this in German, planned to march on the Burger Brokeller, a large beer hall in Munich, Germany, where Ritter von Kahr was giving a speech for over 3,000 individuals. This Storm Detachment, the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, or NSDAP for short, is very, very much equivalent to the Proud Boys in 2020 for Donald Trump. But as the sun dipped lower towards the horizon, the 603 SA extremists marched on and surrounded the beer hall, taking control and placing a machine gun in the auditorium, again filled with 3,000 people. Some 20 Nazi Party officials, then led by Hitler, advanced past the gun into the crowded auditorium. Understandably terrified, the audience was in a frenzy, some crying, some cussing out the invaders. Then suddenly, Hitler jumped onto a chair shouting, "The National Revolution has broken out. The hall is surrounded by 600 men. Nobody is allowed to leave." He then proceeded to lay out his plans for replacement of the Bavarian government. This was violent by German culture. Hitler, followed by 20-some high-ranking officials, met with von Kahr in the back room. Included in the confrontation was Hermann Göring, a German military leader, Alfred Rosenberg, a major proponent of white supremacy and all things disgusting, and Rudolf Hess, the future Deputy Führer of the Third Reich. All these men, while influential, were still considered kind of a joke by most of the Western world. After attempts to corrupt von Kahr, the furious Hitler went back into the auditorium and claimed, quote, "Either the German Revolution begins tonight or we will all be dead by dawn." Shortly after various speeches, the crowd dispersed into the night and the real worry began. Beginning around midnight, units of Kampfbahn, the earliest version of a Nazi army, began organizing and attempting to hold various key buildings around the city. This continued throughout the night, terrorizing citizens until roughly 3 a.m. At that exact moment, the first shots damning the Weimar Republic ran out clear. Fatality after fatality, this was the first bloody Nazi campaign. The show of insurrection and threats didn't last long, though, as Röhm and his men were forced back by the Reichswehr, the National German Army. Even so, throughout the night, Hitler's cronies terrorized the civilians, keeping many nervously up throughout the night. By the early morning of the 9th, the Munich City Council were taken as hostages. Even so, by mid-morning of the 9th, Hitler realized he had failed in an attempt of a coup. Morale was low within the state terrorist ranks, and some were beginning to consider leaving. But before they could leave and possibly prevent decades of murder and terror, officers were once more rallied and began walking without any real destination in mind. This led to a confrontation at the steps of the Bavarian Defense Ministry, essentially the headquarters for the National Army. There, 130 soldiers blocked the way, led by Police Lieutenant Michael von Gottling. And after many heated minutes passed by, the opposing forces began exchanging fire, with 16 Nazis and 4 police officers dying in the process. And facing the defeat of attempted insurrection, Hitler was forced to leave Germany and eventually serve 5 years behind bars for treason to the state. But we're all aware of what came next. This brings us again to the modern age. The beer hall was violent, nationalist, and spewing of racism, but so was the insurrection of the Capitol. And we here at For the Future of Us All feel it necessary to repeat some of these historical lessons discussed today as to inform and educate, so maybe it becomes easier to contextualize what we are all witnessing in America currently. We believe there's 2 lessons that are necessary of repeating. The first is that when Hitler was committing these terrorist acts, his opponents simply laughed him off, considered him a joke, a hothead, and certainly not a threat to their power. This is certainly not how Trump's opposition reacted to this event. With less than a week left in his term, the House of Representatives, in a bipartisan vote, impeached Donald Trump of incitement to riot, the second time he's been impeached. This is a first for the United States. Essentially, his opponents did the furthest thing away from laughing him off. That's good for the world. However, many others are getting laughed off, including many enemies to the state and alt-right groups such as the Proud Boys. This must end. It is remarkably similar to all of Hitler's cronies discussed in today's videos. And an army of people, even without a dictator, can still cause great harm. No matter where you stand politically, this nation holds its loyalty to its people and the Constitution. not to any single person. That's a monarchy. We fought 2 major wars not to have that. Can we please not go back? And for the future of us all, we better get educated and find solutions.